Hey, let's talk about the PTR. I'm going to read the brief introduction here that they wrote. So the team has been keeping an eye on recent tournaments, and after careful consideration and internal discussion, today we've patched the PTR to include the following additional changes and updates. Our focus has been on human vulnerability to summon harass, Undead's overperformance, Night Elf Tier 1 dominance. And then thank you to all these guys. Fine. So this is their main focus. I believe all three of these are kind of strangely worded here. Human vulnerability to summon harass. It feels like this is more directed towards like skeleton harass than anything else because, as we all know, human has the arcane tower, so they're probably one of the best equipped races to deal with summons. But okay. Undead's overperformance. Uh, this is one of those weird situations where I'm not really sure. Like Undead sure feels kind of strange in that it's like very powerful right now. But is it overperforming at the top level internationally? Like it's easy to look at Happy winning everything and saying that Undead is broken, but if you look at the broader picture, I'm not really sure we can say that Undead is overperforming, but okay. Night Elf Tier 1 Dominance. Another strangely worded point here because what Tier 1 Dominance is that? This is one matchup. They're talking about against Orc. That's the only matchup where Tier 1 is dominating. So that's kind of strange to just put it like that. So it's a bad start to me where all 3 points are kind of wonky. It's like, okay, this is why is this your main focus? Uh, you know, but okay. Let's go right to the balance changes here then. So the Arcane Tower gets a buff. Increase feedback plus summon damage from 20 to 25. Basically, this reduces the amount of attacks needed to kill summon units. And they give a bunch of examples here, which I'm not going to read. But we will read the developer's notes here. This change should help human deal with constant summon harass, which should in turn mitigate peasant losses. Which is true, that's a true statement. If we buff the Arcane Tower, human will have a bit easier time in the early game. So again, this feels like it's more geared towards like skeleton harass than anything, but of course it also affects spirit wolves, the odd treant harass that you might see. To me, my spontaneous reaction to this is that it's kind of from left field. Like, where is this buff coming from? Who asked for this? Who thought this was needed? It seems like kind of a random change, and it seems like a change that isn't necessary because if you look at a spirit wolf and you're going to use this against human, then you have a pretty small window in the early game where you can actually harass their economy with it. So why would you make it even worse by slightly buffing the Arcane Tower? This does nothing to deal with like late game harass when there's like a level 3 Fan and Eyes and anti-magic potion, or if there's like a Zeppelin drop with Chain Wave. Like this doesn't really affect that. This is just kind of making the early game easier for human, where I don't think it's necessary. Because again, your incentive to actually make wolves is getting smaller now to do wolf harass, for example. But perhaps it's necessary to deal with skeleton harass. I'm not sure. The increased feedback damage though kind of worries me because I feel like as an idle player at least, just getting one arcane tower. If they get one arcane tower up with their expansion, they're doing a fast expansion. It's enough to pretty much hold anything. If they can just repair that and right click whatever hero you have, like if you get an Eye second or a Panda second, the arcane tower is already incredibly powerful. So to me, this is unnecessary. If anything, we should maybe look at like a slight nerf to this, because I believe Arcane Tower together with Nerubian Tower are like the two S tier towers in the game. So certainly I don't think we need a buff there, but moving on. So that's the only change to human. They get one buff and no nerfs. I think that's interesting to note as we keep going here that there are no nerfs to human. So Orc gets a buffed mirror image, so now costs 80 instead of 100. I'm not going to read the text here because basically this is very obviously made for one matchup, the Orc against Night Elf matchup, to make it a bit easier to get out of Entangle, get out of Acid Bomb, and throw some Lightning Shield on the mirror image. I think this is fairly innocuous. I think this is a small enough change where it's fitting for a PTR. Like, yeah, let's go from 100 to 80 and no other changes. Let's try that. I think this should be like the blueprint for any further balance or PTR changes. This is like the level I think is good to try something, because Warcraft is such an old game and such an established game that a lot of these changes are just so extreme. But this is, I think, a good example of the level of change that should be attempted. Whereas the second one, I think, is kind of the opposite here, because Tarn Chieftain, the War Stomp stun duration against heroes reduced from 2, 3, 4 to 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. The reasoning behind this is that War Stomp is an extremely powerful skill that performs quite well against enemy forces. However, its hero stun lock potential needs to be reined in slightly. Now this word slightly here I think is misused, because this is a lot more than slightly, especially if you look at level 3 here, going from 4 to 2.5 is very significant. I think this is, my first reaction to this is that it's kind of misplaced. I think War Stomp being good against heroes gives you a lot more interaction in the game than War Stomp being good against units. So what do I mean by this? I mean that if I have an 80 food army and the Orc player has an 80 food army and we both attack into each other, War Stomp is going to be super efficient against my army pretty much no matter what. It's very difficult to like play around War Stomp, just like Thunderclap. It's just there. It's going to do a ton of damage. It's going to be in your way. And if we compare that to War Stomp against heroes, if I get like all 3 of my heroes stunned by War Stomp, either I've done something very wrong or my opponent's done something very right. So if anything, I feel like War Stomp being good against heroes is fine, and I'd rather nerf it against army, if that makes sense. I'd rather War Stomp be less overwhelming in a fight than specifically against heroes. At the same time, I can kind of see the reasoning here. We got like, it's not fun to get your hero War Stomp for 4 seconds and then hexed and then it dies or something like that. So perhaps we need to nerf it against heroes. I'd rather see a nerf against actual units, but that's my initial thought. Moving on to Undead here. Spirit Tower and Ruby Tower repair rate increased from 35 to 60, so it repairs more slowly. And the reasoning here is that recent changes have allowed Undead to expand more easily, so we feel that the repair rate of their towers should be brought in line with the other races. Initially, I think this is an interesting change, because if I'm thinking from an idle perspective, my first thought is, oh, maybe I can do a bear push. Maybe I can threaten that expansion with a fast tier 3 fast bear push, because they can't repair that one Nerubian tower as quickly. So it opens up perhaps some possibility to actually threaten the expansion. But if I think a bit more about it, then I feel like the Undead only has to just make a couple more towers. Like the expansion isn't as easy to defend, but I still think you just need to re-establish where the line goes. How many towers do you need? So maybe you need to block it with a sacrificial pit. Maybe you need to get a couple extra towers, but you're still probably going to be safe. So it's an interesting choice to nerf this of everything. My second thought is that, yikes, this might make something like mass tanks or mass raiders a lot more scary. Like Nerubians are very good to deal with tanks to slow them down. And if you can't repair them as quickly, like imagine 4 or 5 tanks being dropped into your main, right-clicking your Spirit Towers and Nerubian Towers. Like it might actually make you not want to upgrade them if this repair is not applied to Ziggurats, which it seems like it's not. It might actually be like a mistake to get Nerubian Towers, which feels kind of weird. So I'm a bit apprehensive about this change, just from a laming aspect, like tanks, raiders, stuff like that. But we'll see. I think this is also one of those PTR-worthy changes, where it's not too much, but it could affect the game in a positive way, so let's try it. I like it. Destroyer. The cast point time reduced from 0.83 to 0.5. This seems, I'm not going to read the notes here, but this seems like it's fine. You know, if I played Undead and like if it's difficult to use the Destroyer Dispel because it has a delay, then yeah, it should be the same as everyone else. It shouldn't be like an issue to remove something with Destroyers. At the same time, it can lead to some pretty interesting games situations. Like if I cast a Rejuvenation on my Demon Hunter, even though he has a Destroyer, I can try to juke it with my movement, and maybe I can dodge the destroyer. Like it's kind of like a mini game in the game, which would disappear if this goes through, which is kind of sad. It's a bit unique to the destroyer. Cryptlord, the burrow ability for carrion beetle level 2 and 3 requires the burrow upgrade. I think this is excellent. This is what Happy suggested. Just like Force of Nature with Treants, the beetles need the upgrade before it kicks in. I think it's a great change. I think level 2 beetles really were a bit too oppressive with the burrow. Perhaps it's gone too far now with like the double nerf. But we'll see. We'll see. I like this. I like this a lot. Death Knight. Unholy Aura level 2, movement speed reduced from 20% to 15%. Very strange change here in my opinion. The notes here say that the Death Knight has been the staple premier hero for Undead for a very long time. After numerous buffs to other parts of the Undead arsenal, the Death Knight remains supreme. We've noticed that once the Death Knight reaches Unholy Aura level 2, they are able to take fights they wouldn't normally be able to due to their increased mobility and kiting potential. Kind of strange to just kind of nerf. Like it makes it a bit asymmetrical now. If it goes 10%, 15%, 30%, it's a weird way to change the spell. I'd rather see it slightly nerfed across the board instead of just hitting level 2 like this. I guess it incentivizes going Death Pact at level 4, perhaps. But I think they have stumbled upon an issue with Undead, which is the mobility. It can be very frustrating to deal with an Undead that's just running around, never taking a fight until they are absolutely certain they can win it, and they can do that because of the aura. Like movement speed is a very powerful thing in Warcraft 3. I think it's a lot more powerful than the developers in 2002 realized or intended. So I think this is also one of those PTR worthy changes. This is not too extreme. It's interesting to see how this pans out. It will be kind of strange to go from like level 2 aura to level 3 and it's like double as good. Like the in-game it's going to look pretty silly. But yeah. Maybe it incentivizes like picking aura level 3 at level 5 Death Knight or something crazy like that. But we'll see. So moving on to the Nilf here. Wisp mana drained on detonate reduced from 50 to 25. This is the one that everyone's buzzing about right now. So let's see the developer's notes here. Detonate has become too powerful, especially against Orc due to their lack of mana regeneration options for their casters. Alright. So, very, very targeted nerf here. This is specifically meant for the Orc versus Nilf matchup. We've all seen those games. Orc is pushing the Nilf expansion. The Nilf pulls about 20 Wisps. All of a sudden, there's no mana on the Shaman, there's no mana on the Shadowhunter, and the Night Elf can hold and win. But this is a very, very, very extreme nerf, to the point where I say this breaks the game. If this goes through, Warcraft Night Elf is not going to be playable anymore. Like compare this. I'm skipping ahead now, but if we compare this to the bear buff here, which is they get 1 extra attack. Like this is such a small change, and this is such a huge change. It kind of makes me question how they decide on the exact numerical values for these changes. Like why are you so brazen with the Wisp here? Like, oh, let's go from 50 to 25. That's huge. But with the bear, oh, let's add 1. Let's add 1. Like, who decides the extremities of these changes? It's just kind of weird to me. But yeah, I'd be very, very surprised if this actually leaves the PTR. My suggestion would be go from 50 to 40, because it is a bit too strong against Orc. It's one of those situations where it's very difficult to handle as Orc and very easy to handle as Night Elf. You just pull all your Wisps and you can kind of hold. But these Wisps are also very important against Human. Late game against Human, to defend against rifle pushes, like we need these Wisps. So to nerf it just for the Orc matchup inadvertently breaks other matchups or situations. Even against Undead. Like the Wisp, I think it's very unique. It's a very weak worker early on, has a little HP, can get harassed, but it's, it can harvest anywhere on the map. It's a good scout, and it can detonate to remove some mana, kill some summons. It's a very versatile, cool unit. And this feels like, you're kind of removing some of the uniqueness from it because nobody's going to use detonate anymore if this goes through. Like unless you're desperately trying to kill some summons or something. But this is way too extreme. So the next is the Druid Claw Bear form. Base damage increased from 24 to 25. I really want to read the notes here. Night Elf has recently been heavily reliant on tier 1 units, so we are hoping the Wisp Detonate change, along with slightly buffing the damage of Druid of the Claw, should promote more strategic variety. Well, I would say it's probably the opposite. Like, what strategic variety are you looking for here? Heavily reliant on tier 1 units. Again, this feels like it's mostly talking about the Orc matchup. I guess we see like a lot of archers these days against, like you can do a mass archer strategy against undead. You can go like archer giant against human. But I don't see how these go hand to hand, like hand in hand. Like why would you, I don't know, slightly buffing bears. I think bears are still pretty bad and they need more buffs or nerfs to other things in the game. Bears are still going to be pretty mediocre, pretty bad, not used unless you absolutely have to, pretty much. So yeah, these two changes together don't really make sense to me. But like I said, I'd be very surprised if the detonate change makes it through. And we might even see bears. Like maybe it's just make bears the way they were before all the balance changes happened. It would kind of make the mirror matchup more boring because then all of a sudden mass bears is the way to go again. But it would also make bears more usable against undead and human, which is where they really need to shine a bit more right now. They're very underwhelming, I would say. The Chimera, friendly fire removed. Another one of those changes where like, what? Why? Where did this come from? Who decided this was a necessary change? So they say that, okay, well, Frostfur's Griffin Riders, they don't have this downside, but Chimera has a downside, so let's remove it. Fair enough, I guess, but this certainly will impact Free For All and 4 vs 4. It won't really impact 1 vs 1. And this is also one of those things where it's like, it was kind of this unique aspect to the Chimera. Kind of like the Destroyer, Dispel, duration. This feels like just one of those quirky things about Chimeras that made them a bit more unique. You had to be a bit careful how you used them because they would damage your own units. So I wouldn't go through with this either. I'd just keep them the way they are. So items here: Helm of Valor, Medallion of Courage, Hood of Cunning. Stat increase changed from +4 to +5 for each stat provided. Notes: these items were underpowered compared to the other items available in the same tier, so we're increasing the stats they provide. Another kind of innocuous change. It's still going to be kind of an RNG fiesta when you get these items. Some are going to be a lot better than others, even if it's +5 instead of +4. To me, nothing to write home about. I don't think it's going to affect the game too much. Claw of Attack +6 replaced with Claw of Attack +5. I like it. Some people might say, it should be +4, but I think this is another one of those good PTR level changes. This isn't too extreme. +6 to +5, fine. Same thing with the bear, honestly, like from 24 to 25, fine. If all the changes were at this level, it'd be a lot more interesting as far as PTR goes. But when you have this change and this change together with this change, it just blows my mind how it's like two extremes here, like these super tiny changes that might affect the game or might not affect the game, to these like game-breaking decisions to just, we're going to remove the Wisp from the game, pretty much. So yeah, all in all, it's a step in the right direction, kind of ish. But at the same time, like I said, I think some of the changes are way too extreme. Some are too small, or I think they would be just right if everything was at this level. So if the Wisp Detonate was from 50 to 40, Bear Attack was from 24 to 25, the Unholy Aura maybe would be less nerfed. The War Stomp, maybe you could start smaller. Like you don't have to go from 4 seconds to 2.5. It's a huge change. It's And it's easy to look at these and think, oh, it's just a second or two. It's not a big difference, but this is huge. And I think everyone remembers when they nerfed the Keeper of the Grove, like when they nerfed Entangling Roots. That was also just like a second or two across the board, but it made a huge impact. And Tauren Chieftain feels like kind of almost like a crutch for Orc at this point. So I think this is kind of scary. So again, overall, I would have liked smaller changes. I think all the changes that were made were fine, but just make them a bit smaller across the board instead of having some of them being extreme and some of them being very small. And for me, at least, the elephant in the room here is that human received 0 nerfs, which is very, very surprising to me. There's nothing here to address the human versus night elf matchup, which is a very problematic matchup right now and has been for a long time. There's no addressing Thunderclap. There's no addressing like the general human gameplay, the human expansion style gameplay hasn't really been addressed, other than that it's been slightly buffed because of the Arcane Tower. So if this goes through the way it does now, my fear is that human will dominate the game. But it is just a PTR. Hopefully some of these changes won't be as extreme or make it through, and perhaps they will consider for a moment that maybe human needs a nerf or two. What I'm thinking specifically of here, I already mentioned Thunderclap, which definitely needs to be nerfed a bit, I think. I would also throw into the mix here Defend. They need to address Defend and Thunderclap for human. Perhaps even Slow. Defend, Thunderclap, and Slow are the things that I think at least deserve a second look, if we're talking about nerfs. But again, I think this is a fine start. I'd be very, very surprised if the Wisp change actually makes it through. That's the one that kind of sticks out the most to me. But yeah, we'll see. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little rant here, and I will see you guys in the future. Thank you for listening.